I will call to order first the Cannabis Control Commission meeting. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy Mayor Thomas Renner.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, we have one item on for discussion: approval, renewal of a retail cannabis license for Happy Trees Company. Welcome, Brevi.
Hi. So the applicant in this case is looking for approval from the local Cannabis Commission for opening a retail sales use at 147 East Allen Street. Property is located in the Gateway District, permits retail use by right. When I wrote the memo, I had heard back from the fire marshal and the Department of Public Works. They had no concerns. Police chief got back to me this morning. He had no concerns to note as well. So at this point, I'd recommend approval of this license.
All right, thank you. And I think the applicant is in our Zoom call. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from council? I don't know. Mark, anything you want to share, or are you just listening in to hear the approval?
I wasn't sure how the meeting would go, so yeah, I'm here to answer any questions and obviously, open for an approval. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Aurora.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I did have a question, and I was just wondering why you chose Winooski to start this venture.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I've known Jen from Winooski Beverage for a while. My background's in restaurants and beer brewing. I actually used to go to the homebrew store to buy homebrew supply, so I know the area pretty well. With how the kind of how Vermont's rolled it out, it's opt-in, opt-out, as many of you know. So if you're limited to the towns that have opted in, excuse me. And at the time of when I pursued this space, there was a single license in Winooski. I knew that a third of the population lives in the greater Burlington area. So to me, it was a good high volume location that was coming available, and the price was pretty good in terms of lease rate. So I thought that a lot of the things made sense for it, plus just knowing the inherent traffic that comes into that parking lot already. Thought it made it a good idea, plus it's close to the highway. So yeah, a lot of it had to do with location and the number of licenses at the time in Winooski. I live in Waterbury, and I'm in Burlington all the time. So to me, it's easily accessible from where I live, and yep, just seemed to make a lot of sense.
Thank you. I assume that Waterbury hasn't approved.
It has. They opted in, but I'm actually I'm a small investor in a store here, and that was kind of the motivation to maybe look at doing one on my own.
Gotcha. One other question that I have, and this might be not something that you really have an answer for yet. Our other retail store has kind of been really highly engaged in the local community, like they've sponsored our farmers market and stuff like that. And I'm just wondering if you have any plans on kind of being a part of the Winooski community, if you've connected with downtown Winooski or anything like that yet, or if you're still just kind of in the beginning stages.
Yeah, I think similar to how I have a restaurant in Waterbury and so that we really do try to give back to the community and sponsor where and if we can, and understand that as a retail storefront, those small investments can really pay off in terms of just the connection to the community. So yeah, we absolutely hope to be a part of the town. And I don't know if you know, the name of the business is going to be called Dome City, which is a connection to the idea of doming the city back in the 70s. Trying to do something that just connects just through name to the community. And then yeah, we hope to continue to build relationships and become a staple in town.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, I did see the name. I like that a lot.
right, thank you. Any questions from members of the public? Okay. Hearing no additional questions or concerns from council, do I have a motion to approve this license renewal?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us, Mark.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. That is the end of the Cannabis Control Commission agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Bryn, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. So it's 6:05 and we'll call to order the Winooski City Council meeting. First up is agenda review. Any concerns about the order this evening? Okay. We will move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone who is here for an item not on this evening's agenda to make comment. We do hold public comment space on every agenda item. If you are in Zoom and wish to make public comment, you can use the raise hand feature or the chat to let me know. Okay, seeing no public comment, we will move to the consent agenda. We have our Liquor Control Board and City Council minutes of October 7th, the payroll warrant for September 29 to October 12, accounts payable warrant October 17th, and the event permit for Halloween in Winooski. Any concerns about the consent agenda?
No.
Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Thomas, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. We will move on to council reports. Councilor Hurd, would you like to kick us off?
Certainly, I don't have a huge amount to report. We had to reschedule our meeting with the Inclusion and Belonging Commission to November 7th. That isn't because of not reaching a quorum at our usual date. We do have two folks that we were hoping to bring on as members, but we've hit a little bit of a glitch with Safe Healthy Connected not currently having a chair. And for just a reminder, Inclusion and Belonging Commission members must have approval of the chairs of the other commissions before they come before council. So we're kind of trying to figure out navigating that situation. But again, we are rescheduled for November 7th. That'll be at 6 p.m. and over Zoom.
Thank you. Councilor Oakley?
Sure. Municipal infrastructure met last Thursday on the 17th. We had a joint meeting with the Finance Commission. We reviewed the capital improvement plan and items for, began discussion for fiscal year 26 budget priorities. We anticipate having a follow-up meeting with them next month on November 12th at their regular date and time. I believe it will be here in City Hall at 6 p.m. And online options for anybody that has interest and can't make it in person. Once we concluded that discussion, the infrastructure commissioners also reviewed the first of two traffic calming assessments. Based on the initial review of Richard Street assessment, there are no recommendations for traffic calming measures at this time, but speed enforcement is recommended as part of that, as part of the findings. For the second of the two studies, the commissioners voted to have West Canal Street as that follow-up street based on complaints that have come in and crash and property damage reports that have come to the attention of the city thus far. So because we anticipate that could be ready by the end of December, if not sooner, we'll see. And because we're meeting with the Finance Commission on November 12th, we will not have our regular meeting on November 21st. And there is moving on from that, there is an airport noise exposure map update public meeting on October 24th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. That will be held at Winooski High School. And for additional information on that public meeting, and if you can't make it and want to provide comments, go to btvsound.com. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, since our last meeting, we had a planning commission meeting. That group is close to completing work on the replacement ordinance. I expect they will wrap that up at their November meeting and set a public hearing as required before advancing to city council. Current plans are that the replacement requirement would apply to demolition or redevelopment of all 2-bedroom plus units in the city, including a payment to the Housing Trust Fund, a payment in lieu option. Their next meeting is November 14th. This will also include a public hearing for the final zoning updates that are needed to comply with state statute updates of Act 181, which require regulations for hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing, cannot interfere with the functioning of use, requires municipalities to allow parking spaces in adjacent or nearby lot to count toward parking requirement for residential buildings, and the Development Review Board to notice and warn hearings within 120 days of an application being deemed complete. So those changes will also be coming forward to us in the near future.
Nice.
That is it for me.
Perfect. So yes, Safe, Healthy, Connected People Commission met, and as Councilor Hurd did mention, a chair was not picked. The members of the commission had some questions surrounding that, which I think they had directed towards Ray. Ray's giving a thumbs up, so I think that's all good. So they will be picking a chair at their next meeting, which will be November 12th. The commission received a presentation from the police chief about the fair and impartial policing policy, and the commission is going to be reviewing the old policy and the new policy and giving the chief some recommendations. Downtown Winooski is seeking volunteers to assist with pumpkin carving. Those shifts for helping with carving start tomorrow at the senior center. You can visit downtownwinooski.org/Halloween to learn about all of the opportunities to help with carving and setting up pumpkins, because it takes a village. And the Winooski Food Shelf is also seeking volunteers, particularly for its 2 busiest days, November 16th and December 21st. And you can learn more at winooskifoodshelf.org. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
Yeah, nothing too crazy. The Winooski Housing Commission meets tomorrow night at 6 p.m. here at City Hall. There's a hybrid link available through the agenda on the city website. We'll be discussing the Housing Trust Fund policies, upcoming developer roundtable, and an armory parcel update. The Housing and Planning Commission would both like to remind you to the public that we have a joint meeting at 6 p.m. on November 19th to continue our discussion on inclusionary zoning and replacement ordinances. We welcome residents to join us in this process before these items move forward to council. And that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to city updates. Elaine.
I just have one because council covered the other two I was going to talk about, which is great. So we encourage people to take the budget survey ahead of council's discussions about the fiscal year 2025 to 2026 budget, which they will start in December. That budget survey can be found at winooskivt.gov in the news alerts section. It asks different questions from the money budgeting activity that some of you might have participated in at the farmers market. So encourage folks to answer the budget survey that's available online at winooskivt.gov.
All right, thank you. Moving on to regular items. First up for discussion approval, the base technical design approval for the Burlington-Winooski Bridge. John will join us, as well as Bob Kleinfelter and Carolyn, I forgot your last name. Coda, thank you. And then we have some folks on Zoom as well. I will move them over.
So I'll do a quick intro and then oh, perfect. Yeah. It's gonna scoot back, but I got 3 chairs. So this is for the Burlington-Winooski Bridge. It's what's called the base technical concept. So that basically refers to the general design elements for the bridge. So that includes the alignment, some of the geometry of the bridge. A lot of this we've discussed previously through public presentations. There has been some modifications probably since the last time you've seen it based on public feedback. So we have the design team here to present that. So we have folks from HNTB, see Josh online, and obviously VTrans. So we've been working with this hand in hand with the city of Burlington. So they're also going to be reviewing this at a later date. But I believe that that's probably going to be in the winter because they have the intersection project too.
I think we were targeting December 9th for the council.
So we'll get to go first on this. And this is being presented for discussion and or approval. So if you're happy with the way this is proceeding on the base technical concept, obviously you can move forward tonight, but we did factor in another meeting if you did want to have some feedback and have us bring it back for discussion. So yeah, with that, I will, I think I'll pass along to Josh for the presentation.
Yep. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And sharing is not turned on.
Here we go.
All right.
Oh, and while Josh is doing that, we also have Ryan Lambert here, our city engineer, to answer any questions too.
Excellent.
Give me 1 second to start this, and then I'm going to share. I think this will work. All right, let's see if I can share my screen and present. Can everybody see the presentation? Or are you seeing kind of the sidebar still?
There we go.
Perfect, Josh.
Excellent. All right, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I think we've already been through introductions. You guys mentioned Bob myself in the audience, the V-Train Structures Project Manager for the Bridge Project, and Carolyn Coda, the V-Train Structures Program Manager. Myself, I'm a consultant project manager with HNTB, working with Bob, Carolyn, and many others to deliver this project. Tonight's agenda is pretty concise. We'll walk you through the overall purpose of the project. We'll talk about what we're proposing for the base technical concept for this project. We'll then walk through a few additional RFP considerations, which is those kind of contracting considerations, and some of the near-term next steps that we're working on as part of this project. So let's start right off here with the overall meeting purpose. I know John kind of mentioned it. Really the purpose is to seek approval on that base technical concept. And maybe that happens tonight, or maybe that happens at a future meeting, but that's the overall purpose here, is to present what we think is the right solution, which is really the framework for this project. It's not going to get into every single nitty-gritty detail, but it's going to be that framework, that layout, that cross-section, things like that. And I believe you have some of that information in your council packet as well. As we go through this, just a reminder that this overall project really does encompass two different portions. We have the bridge project, which starts off in Burlington and touches down Winooski or vice versa. And then we have the intersection project that's fully within Burlington as well. These are both being advanced in one contract, really to help complement each other and work in unison as they're both being reconfigured and replaced. But for tonight's purpose, we're really going to be focusing on the bridge portion of the project, because these two things have separate funding sources, separate projects, and really only the bridge itself touches down Winooski, so that's what we're going to focus tonight. So we want to jump into the base technical concept, and as I mentioned, we're really just trying to lay out the framework for what this solution is. A lot of those details are in your package. We're going to be talking through them and show some visuals to help explain what those are. But this concept is really building upon that scoping report that was finalized back in 2019 that talked about a replacement bridge, the number of lanes, all those types of things. And we've been building upon that since with some engineering over the past few years, so like receiving public feedback, collecting that input, reshaping some of the finer features of this, talking with stakeholders, etc. So this really is kind of the culmination of all that engineering and public feedback to the point where we're at a point where we can really propose what we think is the right solution for this project. So let's jump right in here with the overall cross-section for the bridge. And this should look fairly familiar to what you might have seen either on the website or public, or we're going to have past council presentations. Starting right off in the middle here, we have the 4 travel lanes, 4 11-foot travel lanes with short 2-foot shoulders on each side. And then outboard those travel lanes, you'll see 2 shared use paths, the one on the right being 12 feet, which is what we've been showing this whole time. The one on the left, however, which is the downstream side, and we're kind of along Riverside and West Canal Street, that one we've increased to 15 feet from public input. We received a lot of public feedback that they wanted more space, they thought more space would be appropriate for this type of setting, where it's kind of that if you build it, more people will use it type of situation. we've increased this side from 12 feet to 15 feet in that regard. Moving forward into the overall layout of the base technical concept, we'll show a couple different vantage points for these images. The one on the left here is simply an existing photo. It's just an aerial drone photo that was taken a couple months ago. And then the one on the right is a rendered version of that photo showing the base technical concept. You can see the solution being proposed is a slightly shifted bridge with a curved alignment. And you can see kind of in the background there an intersection that helps complement the bridge as well. But within Winooski in the foreground, you can see that the proposed bridge touches more or less right back down that same place as the existing, right at that bottom left corner of the circulator, and really balances minimizing impacts to the surrounding private parcels, public parcels, etc., and allows for construction to move forward. Taking a slightly different look from Burlington into Winooski, you can get another vantage point here of the curved structure, and you can see, again in the background, that the bridge touches down right at that bottom left corner of the circulator. You can also see on either side of the abutments within Winooski, you can see the green space that's out there. These renderings are purely conceptual to show the overall layout and intent. We have not gotten into specific details of what that park restoration should look like, so we've purposely left them green and grassy for the moment to allow that part of the project to be taken care of at a later time. You can also see underneath the bridge that underbridge path will be reconstructed as part of this project, and you'll still have the decking off to the right as well. And finally, taking a look kind of from the side of the bridge to get a little bit different viewpoint, you can see that the overall bridge that we're proposing is more or less the same length as the existing, but you can see only one pier in the river compared to the two that are out there today. So we're reducing the number of supports in the river. We're going to be at least meeting and perhaps increasing the overall waterway capacity underneath the bridge by keeping the bridge length more or less the same length, removing a pier, and keeping that low core, that bottom of the beam elevation, more or less the same as what it is today. And again, you can see the park space over here on the left, purely shown green for the moment. We have more details to figure out there. And a couple of them are going to be conceptually shown here on this graphic as well. So this is just a colorized engineered graphic just to show a little bit more of what's happening within the approach within Winooski. These are just some of the things that we're working through, and I believe a few of them are in your packet as well, so I'll just kind of talk through a couple of them. First, in the upper left, that underbridge path that I mentioned a few times, that will be reconstructed as part of this project, so you don't have to worry about that going away. But in addition to that, we are looking at putting an active transportation connection through that park to touch down to that underbridge path. That's something we've heard that's very important to users of the path, bikers, walkers, etc., that start off on that westerly side of the bridge and end up wanting to go east once they get across the bridge. So that's something we're looking into and trying to provide some harmony with the park restoration. We've also heard that parking spaces along Main Street in front of those first two buildings right off the bridge is very important. We're showing we can achieve 4 in this case. I think within the packet that you have, we're looking to simply get at least 2, and more would be better. But we are showing that it is feasible and not too problematic. We're also showing brick sidewalks in this case. We're showing that we can connect right back into the circulator to limit the amount of approach work and different traffic patterns that we might want to talk about. Trying to compare it back a little bit to some of the more current features or the more tangent alignment that we've seen previously, I want to present this graphic again. This is a graphic we recycled from past presentations, so the images on the left and right are a little outdated. The version on the right's got a little bit sharper curve than what we're proposing today, and it doesn't quite show that 15-foot path on the left-hand side of the bridge. So I'll just point out that these are older images, and that's why they look a little bit different. But really where I want to focus is right back in the middle, just to talk about some of the differences here. So we got the tangent bridge on the left, we got the curved bridge on the right. Let's first talk about some of the detours. I think in the past we talked that the version on the left here, this tangent bridge, would require 4 lanes to be detoured at once. All northbound traffic, all southbound traffic to be detoured. And that detour would last for about 4 to 6 weeks. The version on the right would require 2 lanes of traffic to be detoured. What we're proposing is to detour the southbound traffic and maintain 2 northbound lanes across across the bridge. Although we are keeping traffic moving across the bridge, that duration of the detour would be longer. I'm placing that 16 to 24-week period, or roughly 4 to 6 months, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. What's really important to note is that we're talking vehicular traffic being detoured. Pedestrian and bicycle traffic will still be maintained across the river at the site at all times, although there might need to be some very, very temporary disruptions to that crossing for safety reasons during very specific construction operations.
Josh, just to be clear, what we're seeing there is that the curved alignment, it's a longer detour, but there's still vehicle traffic flow versus on alignment would have a complete detour. Okay.
That is correct.
Yeah, and one thing just to note on that, in our meetings with emergency services, even though we'd be maintaining northbound traffic only, something we'll look into is setting up preemption on the Burlington intersections to go all red. So in theory, emergency services ambulances should be able to go south across the bridge.
Okay.
Even though it's only open to northbound traffic, but we think we can set up the intersection on the Burlington side likely to go all red and at least make its own ambulance can make its way across,
Okay.
which is important. They've said specifically responding to this part of town. So it can be add a fair amount of time to go around.
Moving on, we've also, again, this is an older graphic, but just to kind of underscore that we have looked at the traffic implications associated with both these different types of situations, whether it's a full closure or a partial closure. Probably just focusing a little bit more on the right-hand side of this screen, we've got at the top right a general existing conditions traffic map of what's happening around that detour, and color coding is generally following the stoplight. So if it's green, things are moving. If it's red, things are pretty congested. So that's just a typical day kind of around the detour. Looking down a row, if we were to close all the lanes across that bridge, you can see that all the traffic would need to detour elsewhere, and you get a lot more of those red lines, more the gridlock, stop and go type of traffic throughout the entire area. And finally, on the bottom right, if you're willing to detour the southbound traffic and keep northbound flowing, you can see that it's kind of a balance between the two. You still get some green movements and yellow movements, and those red movements are predominantly down along that major corridor where southbound traffic is trying to find their way into Burlington. And again, this is just showing that balance, just a snapshot of a PM peak. These conditions vary by day, time of day, etc. It gives you a general sense of what happens when we look at that type of closure. And just for points on here, these 1 and 2, point 1 is the UVM Medical Center, and point 2 is just a general place in downtown Winooski if you were looking at these times. So that's the base type of concept in a nutshell. Looking at things like the cross-section, the generalized layout, some of the features like the under-bridge path connection through the parks, etc. But then we still need to take it a step further and actually start putting pen to paper and come up with these RFP considerations. So the RFP stands for request for proposal, basically the contract documents and the contract language that a contractor would have to abide by and work towards with their solution. So within that RFP, we have 2 generalized categories of requirements, one called prescriptive and one called flexible. Prescriptive requirements are things that are absolute requirements without exception. Things like the bridge shall have 4 lanes of traffic, and we'll get into some examples on the next slide. Flexible are things that are generally going to have boundaries associated with them, but there's some wiggle room in what the contractor is going to do and how they can approach things. And that's to really spark innovation on the contractor side and allow them to use their comfort and their means and methods to best drive cost and schedule for everybody's benefit. So let's talk about a few examples of what these flexible and prescriptive requirements are. I mentioned the bridge cross-section earlier. That would be a prescriptive requirement. Contractor shall build a bridge with 4 lanes of traffic at these dimensions and have 2 shared use paths at these dimensions. Those are going to be prescriptive requirements that there's 0 wiggle room. Similarly, 2-span bridge, we don't want a 3-span bridge here. We don't want multiple supports in the river. And there will be a minimum hydraulic opening or waterway opening set within the contract as well. Those will be prescriptive. Things that will be a little bit more flexible are things like the bridge length. Working with those prescriptive requirements of a certain waterway opening and having an unbridged path in Winooski, the bridge will end up being approximately 360 feet long. Maybe it's a couple more feet long, maybe it's a couple feet shorter, but it's going to be that 360-foot length, and we can provide some boundaries around that. Similar with the bridge location, we've presented what we think is the right solution is a shifted alignment with a curved structure, but we're not prohibiting a contractor from coming back with a tangent alignment that generally mimics the structure that's out there today. So you can see within that packet and on the graphic here, we're going to be putting some boundaries up that the contractor needs to work within. 20 feet downstream of the existing and 75 feet upstream. That's where the bridge has to be. Other flexible requirement examples include things like the girder spacing underneath. We're not going to tell them the girders need to be specifically placed at 10-foot increments, but we will likely have some sort of maximum upset limit, maybe a minimum as well. And then similarly, traffic control. We are going to be providing boundaries about what the contractor can work within to make sure the job gets done on time within the boundaries we set, but we're not going to be telling them the exact placement of all flagging devices and the exact every single step along the way, so that way they can mark at their own pace. Speaking of that traffic control, I did want to walk through the anticipated construction progression of the base typical concept, that shifted alignment, a little bit more too. It really comes down to 4 basic phases for traffic on the bridge, and again, we're talking vehicular traffic with these images, with pedestrian and bicyclists being maintained on site at all times. Starting with the left here is what I'm calling the existing conditions. Essentially, you have 4 lanes of traffic on that existing bridge, while a portion of the new bridge is being built immediately upstream of that bridge. At some point, there becomes a little bit of a push where you have to cut the existing bridge down to 2 lanes of traffic to continue to build. This is when we drop that existing bridge down to 2 lanes of northbound traffic for that 4 to 6 month time period. That allows the contractor to keep building upstream and they get to a point when they can shift traffic over to the new structure. When they initially shift traffic, they're going to be putting 3 lanes back onto that bridge. You'll have 2 northbound lanes, just like you've had this whole time, and we'll be opening up a southbound lane, with that southbound lane being dedicated to Riverside so traffic continues to efficiently move throughout that intersection and across that bridge. Over that next 12 to 16 month period, they'll complete demolition of the existing, complete construction of the remainder, and open the bridge entirely up to its full 4 lanes once again. And again, this overall cycle is someplace in that 24 to 30 month time period overall. I will note that these time periods we're showing on screen here, they're approximations. We are working hard to try to find ways to reduce these times in a comfortable manner that balances time on site compared to overall construction cost. And we are going to be looking at ways to incentivize the contractor or encourage them to progress the work a little bit quicker as well. So where does that place us in an overall schedule? We just talked about time frame and construction durations, but what does that mean in the grander scheme? This schedule is something I've shown before. Shouldn't be too new, but you can see that that little yellow bubble where we're at has been sliding over the year. So here we are getting close to 25. We are discussing a base technical concept, defining our footprint, and we still have that continued outreach. We are working through environmental clearances, and we've already begun the right-of-way process in terms of mapping and everything else as well. That puts us roughly a year and a half to year and 9 months away from actually getting the RFP document out to contractors, the formal RFP document. And that's that point when the contractors really start coming up with their proposals and their innovative methods for building this project. That would allow them to then, allow the successful bidder to then complete final design in 27 and likely start construction at the end of 27. Some of that off to the side work that's not impacting traffic. Construction would then last up until the end of 29 or so, and really linger into 2030 with some of the site restoration, the finer features, the finer details, with traffic back in its normal position. So it is quite the duration we're talking about. Here we are at the end of 24, but really out to 2030 before the project itself is completely done. So that's the broad schedule. So what about the near term? We do have some immediate next steps happening. We do have a public open house coming up. It's tentatively scheduled for December 11th, but that has yet to be firmed up. At which point we're going to be having a little bit of a different format compared to just an open public meeting. We're actually going to have different booths and tables to present a lot of the same information that we're presenting tonight, as well as solicit feedback from the public on aesthetics such as railing styles, lighting styles, etc. As John mentioned, we're also going to be going over to Burlington as well to present the same information, plus pull in a little bit of the intersection as well. We have a Transportation, Energy, and Utility Committee meeting next Tuesday, and then a council meeting a little bit later in December as well. Once we get through this upcoming set of council presentations and getting some of the public input, we're going to start turning our focus to that contract development, the request for qualifications and the request for proposals. So we're going to start putting those finer details together that surrounds this base technical concept. And of course, throughout that whole time, we're going to have continued right-of-way environmental and utility coordination to really make sure we get some of those risk factors out of the way and really understand what's going to be happening on site. And so with that, I will open it up for questions.
So apologies, I'm going to call a brief recess for 2 minutes. We'll reconvene at 6:38. So I think we're ready for any questions, feedback from council.
Yeah. 2 questions. Is there a price difference between the curved bridge and the straight bridge?
Yes, yeah, we feel that the on alignment carries a significantly higher cost,
Okay.
which was a factor in choosing this. Not the only factor, but.
And I'll jump in one point for Winooski specifically. It's sort of a moot point for us because we're capped at right around 3 million. So because of our previous grant list, not our current one. So based on the state regs, we're capped. I forget the formula, but it's like 1 penny.
50 cents, the amount that you could raise with a 50-cent increase.
So, you know, the project right now I think is in the $60 to $70 million range total.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
doesn't necessarily impact Winooski, but would
Good
probably
to know for the
impact
taxpayer in general.
Yes, yes.
And it would seem counterintuitive, actually. It would seem the other way around.
Right.
That was my first question.
Yeah, the reason for that is the way it was scoped was a lateral slide, and with the shallow bedrock in the river out there, it really makes it challenging for the temporary supports. So if bedrock was deep, they could just go out there and drag steel piles
Yep.
for temporary supports, but since bedrock's so shallow, they'd have to probably make like concrete foundations on the rock and dewatering in order to do that and everything. So I think just the temporary works is really the difference to do that slide. And then to slide it, which we've done a couple times, but that adds cost. Plus, there's also a risk with the shorter window that the contractor would face some pretty heavy disincentive if something goes wrong and they don't open it in time. So that would likely be built in to some degree as well.
Great. And then I think this will fall on the prescriptive versus flexible requirements. It looks like in the current mock-ups that the divider between the pedestrian and the car portions of the bridge looks like concrete, which I know is something that folks at the several meetings that we had expressed they really wanted. So I'm wondering where that falls in current thinking.
That's a good question. Josh, do you?
Yeah, that's why I'm here. Yeah, so that's part of the public outreach we have coming up as well. All of the barrier separation between vehicles and pedestrians will have a concrete lower base and a steel handrail at the top of it. The barrier on the outside, the pedestrian railing, that's on the far outside of the overall system, we're envisioning that to be more or less purely steel. There'll be a small concrete curb at the bottom for drainage, plowing reasons, etc. But that one will likely be steel. And all of this needs to be generally in line with our 106, our historic commitments as well. So there are a limited number of options that we can present to the public based on historic regulations.
Great. I think people will be happy to hear that. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
I have a couple of questions, but they're kind of about very different elements, so you'll have to help me with who to direct them to. And it was hard to tell from some of the different angles. Is there any elevation increase to the bridge? Like it sounded like, there might be a slight increase to the elevation point, like center point of the bridge to allow for more water to flow underneath. Did I hear that correctly?
In general, yes. The roadway surface really isn't changing compared to today. At least nothing that we're envisioning substantial differences from what you see and feel today. The overall waterway opening underneath would at least match and likely exceed the existing waterway opening. So that bottom of the beam would never get lower than it is today, and the abutments, generally speaking, will be at their same locations as existing or probably a little bit further back.
Okay. I was thinking about flood resiliency
Right.
and if factoring in the recent flooding, we've, 100, 500 year flooding we've had the last 2 summers. And, we've been fortunate here in Winooski, but, that isn't necessarily a sure thing moving to the future. So thinking about, the next 100 years of the bridge, if having a slight elevation increase was built into the plans or something that had been discussed.
Yep, yeah, the resiliency and flood concerns and scour and everything else has certainly been discussed. We haven't come to terms on what the right number is.
Okay.
I will point out the bottom of beams today are 8 feet above that 100-year flood event, that 1% occurrence happening. So from a height perspective, the beams are in a good place. But the rest of the resiliency discussion still matters and needs to happen.
Okay. And then I was also wondering just, flood resiliency being an element, maybe the basis for increasing the elevation of the center point of the bridge. Would that have any beneficial impact on traffic calming?
Raising the center point, probably not so much on traffic calming itself. It would take a pretty significant hump in the road to kind of slow people down for that nerving aspect.
Great, thank you for answering that.
Mm-hmm.
I did hear from some folks in the community that they do favor the curved alignment. So it sounds like, at least from some initial folks that have seen some of the design plans, that they're in favor of that aspect. Of course, it's, a limited segment, but at least some positive thoughts on that already. I was wondering, thinking about some other projects, capital projects that are underway or kind of in progress within our corridor. Is there anything that could disrupt this timeline or delay the timeline?
No, yeah,
Nothing is going to stop this timeline because the grant is,
Okay.
we have to spend the money, we have to meet
By
certain
2030.
things. That's why the 2026,
Okay.
we are gonna have a contractor on board. And it has to be completely, absolutely done, with no money being
All
spent.
checks paid.
All checks paid by 2031, so
Good.
there's nothing. Other projects may have to get delayed because of this one, but this one's moving forward.
Okay, all right.
It's the last thing I do.
We'll hold you to it.
Yeah, hold me tight. I will retire.
There wasn't any discussion about the, with diverting traffic around, there's potential for installing a traffic signal. So there wasn't really any discussion in this presentation about that.
Hoods Crossing.
Yeah, Hoods Crossing, thank you.
Oh, okay.
I can provide an update
Yeah.
on that. So we did receive the finance and maintenance agreement for that project, which identifies that work as associated detour work with the bridge project and it being 100% federally funded. So I think there's still debate if we have to bring that to council, have the attorneys review it, but we do have that agreement that's been sent to us. So basically, once we sign that, it is
Okay.
locked in, and the plan to actually utilize that properly is to have that signal installed prior to the bridge construction. So
I was wondering
it
about the timing.
has to go pretty quick, especially given the railroad coordination that's required.
Okay.
So, yep.
And one thing, just to make sure, I'm sure you've heard it before, but just saying it again, there's a section of sidewalk near that Hoods Crossing that's missing. And some members of our community are really very anxious to have that as a safe passageway along with a traffic signal installed. So I don't know what it would take cost-wise or feasibility-wise, but it is identified, I believe, in our bike ped plan that was just completed this past winter as one of our priority projects.
Yeah, it's a priority sidewalk section that's missing. We've even identified it, I think, in the 2017 Transportation Master Plan as a priority sidewalk.
Okay.
So it's, we will definitely keep
Who's
asking.
the project manager for this?
Mike.
Mike is?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay.
Same one as the Burlington intersection.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Glad to hear it.
Intersection guy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure, that's fine.
I don't think I have any more difficult questions. I was mainly thinking about the flexible / like value engineering items, and if within those flexible items there could be like, if you could rank them, like if you can keep this handful and take away these other options first, like is there a way to provide some type of ranking within the flexible options?
Yeah, in somewhat, and I think I know what you're getting at too. So usually we, as part of the scoring process, we're selecting a successful bidder. There's kind of two items. There's the cost item, but then there's a technical proposal item that shows how they're approaching the project and what they're providing the community that kind of gets weighed in the overall winning bid. Within that, usually there's different sections that encourage contractors to incorporate different elements more readily into the project and get scored higher, even though we know they might cost a little bit more. So we try to encourage the contractors to do things we want in that regard. Does that help?
Yes, it's helpful to know how the bidding process works and how that factors into the selection process. Because I think one of the things that can be really frustrating for the community is to provide feedback and input and say, and one, not necessarily realize that that might be value engineered, or two, have any sense of like, well, can we choose option, like, can option B be weighted higher than option A?
Yeah, I got you.
Within that ranking, or within, of the list of items. So I think it's just, for transparency, it's helpful to make that as clear as possible. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Counselor Hurd?
Hi, yes, actually, right now, one of the questions that I had, so I just have one that I was wondering about, actually possibly two. One of those, the folks talked a lot about wanting to be able to shift carve structured infrastructure a lot in the future, and I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this design can be adaptable.
Certainly. So it's meant to be more adaptable than the current bridge. The girders, those beams that are underneath the roadway surface that really hold up the overall bridge. The existing one has those spaced at about 14 feet apart, which is wider than any of the travel lanes and things like that. So it's not easily adaptable to really cut things up and move things around so much. This other one's going to have more girders in place to be able to move that barrier a little bit more readily and have that redundancy for different traffic patterns. So it does have the width, and it does have the number of girders for redundancy for future construction to allow it to occur. But essentially, in the future, if there's a desire to reduce the number of traffic lanes, those inset barriers could be relocated.
Awesome, thank you. My one other question was just as you were presenting, I was wondering about over on the right side, what those little thing under the walkway is.
Oh, on the lower right here.
Yeah.
So those are utilities. So
Okay.
utilities are a big component out there. They're on the existing bridge. We have to accommodate them on the proposed. So they definitely play into how we phase the bridge, how we phase traffic through the intersection, what time components we give to the contractor for that type of effort. So they're a major influence in how we approach construction and accommodations.
Gotcha, thank you.
Counselor Judd, any questions?
No, covered.
If there's any public comment, any questions, please feel free to use the raise hand or chat feature. Oh, Elaine.
Is there any hold on?
Not yet.
Sorry as staff to be asking these questions in a public meeting. Could you talk us through why 4 to 6 months of northbound only is recommended? That is why it can't be one lane in both directions during that period. Very sensitive to the impacts our current construction project is having on our business community.
Yeah, so what happens is the intersections and some of the configuration around the project are really what creates the issue that we're looking at. So having 2 lanes open but a single lane each direction ends up creating the same conflict movements at all of the different signals around the area and all the different turn movements along the detour route. So what we see is people naturally will want to still try to take the route that they're most comfortable with. So even though you reduce the number of lanes, half the traffic doesn't necessarily disappear, so you end up having a slightly more concentrated per lane vehicle volume trying to get through those intersections, and it just creates congestion and problems. When we change it to 2 lanes in the same direction, and our choice being northbound, is if you follow the southbound traffic kind of around the detour, around I-89 and back through exit 14 into Burlington, it's a lot of right-hand turn movements, which we all know you can generally take more readily at a stop sign or stoplight than a left-hand turn. So it just allows traffic to move through that detour a little bit faster, while northbound is essentially unobstructed going the opposite direction and keeps everybody moving a lot better than opposing traffic that still has to meet at all the same stop conditions.
All right, so along those lines then, is there any possibility in the budget to consider impact payments or on businesses or marketing or wayfinding support?
Talk about that.
Yeah, we did. We met with downtown Winooski in February and gave a presentation and talked a little bit. Melissa Corbin has reached out and asked about grant opportunities that had been awarded to other communities. Middlebury was one of them a few years ago when we had a project with a railroad tunnel through town. So we are committed to having a grant for this project. It would be state-only funds. And what that looks like, typically, we haven't done this a lot, but how Middlebury worked, and I think there's been a couple other cases, is the grant would be awarded to the city, and then the city would distribute the money to different businesses. And there's metrics that go along with qualifying, I guess, for the money more or less. And really the goal in Middlebury, and I think we certainly plan to meet with downtown Winooski to come up with a plan that works best for the business owners, but really to encourage to draw people in. And one thing they did in Middlebury was had pop-up storefronts in some empty buildings where different businesses could come in for short amounts of time. That was one thing they did. And there's a number of different options, but we certainly plan to meet with the project team, both cities, and there'll be businesses affected in Burlington as well, and try to figure out a way to do what we can to support it. How much money we're talking about it, we don't know. And there's not an endless, amount of funds, unfortunately, but, we're definitely committed to doing something and really working with the business community. I think right now, it's just a little too early to really wrap our head around what the impacts are going to be. But we're getting closer, and I think once the base technical concept is sorted out, that does sort of point us in a direction where we can start having those conversations of with the southbound detour, for instance. So that's something we'll be working with downtown Winooski and other stakeholder groups over the next year.
Right, and our focus is yes, the RFP, we'll hire a contractor and a consultant to finish the design of the project in '26, but actual construction won't happen for another year. So we've got a little bit of time, but we're ahead of it. We're not waiting until the last minute here.
And the detour likely won't happen until 2028, I think, right, Josh, at the soonest. I mean, construction may start in late 2027 or mid to late 2027, but the detour, there's work they can do, a fair amount of work that can be done before any detour needs to happen.
That's great, thank you.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for coming again, for the public engagement you've been doing, demonstrating where that's been incorporated into this design, the commitments to support the signalization during the detour and potential business funding. Just really appreciate the partnership in this effort.
Thank you.
Yep.
I am not hearing concerns from council, so I wonder if someone wants to make a motion to approve this base technical design.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Charlie, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries.
Well, thank you.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Thank you.
Good luck at your
Thanks for your hard
round.
work.
That one, yeah. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We're really
We
excited
appreciate
about
you
this
guys.
project.
Yeah, it's been a great project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us online.
Thank you.
Okay. Have I cleared out? Not yet. Okay. We are on to, we'll give Elaine a moment.
This is a long one, sorry.
What's that?
This is an extra long one. It's like twice as long as it normally is.
So 10 minutes.
I'll read super fast.
Okay, moving on to item B, on for discussion, the strategic vision goal area update for housing. Welcome, Jasmine.
Hello, everyone. All right, so this will be the first goal update for this new year. So starting off with the must-do category. So the first one is educating tenants and property owners on changes and updates to the public building registry. No real significant changes here, but we're definitely looking forward to more code staffing to free up time to do more outreach efforts. Obviously, when they're strapped and busy, it's hard to think about capacity to do outreach to the community. So definitely excited as their capacity widens to be able to work with John and Bruce and looking at a little bit more interactive outreach. The next one, continuing to explore updates to the ULU DRs to address housing priorities identified by council. So the Planning and Housing Commissions have held 3 joint meetings, one in March, one in June, and one in September. We've been following kind of an every other month pattern to discuss inclusionary zoning and replacement regulations. It was determined that the Planning Commission will prioritize replacement ordinance language for now, and they have continued working on that. Conversations about the development of inclusionary zoning regulations have been productive thus far, and they'll likely take a few more months before they're finalized. It's just a lot that goes into them. And the 2 commissions will convene a joint developer roundtable in November, so next month now, to support meaningful input from private, public, and nonprofit developers on the current amendments that are proposed. This will be scheduled on November 19th from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m., and it will focus on inclusionary zoning, priority housing incentives, and transportation demand management. The roundtable will aim to provide developers with a platform to raise concerns or offer suggestions before the amendments advance to council. And the purpose is not to debate the need for further changes, but to ensure productive dialogue around the details of the proposed amendments. And we've got a couple of RSVPs so far, so looking forward to that. And then continuing with the Just Cause, not a significant update, but the vote will be on March 4th, so the 2025 ballot. And to ensure the statutory timeline for voter-backed charter amendments, council will need to accept the petition during their December 9th meeting. Moving on to the recommended category. So carrying out the equitable housing needs assessment, As you all probably remember, late last year, the city secured a municipal planning grant from the Vermont Department of Commerce and Community Development to undertake an equitable housing needs assessment. Over the recent months, the city has worked to foster a collaborative partnership between 2 of the 5 bidders. And during these negotiations, it became evident that the 3 parties needed to collaborate on the project's scope and approach to meet its equity goals. Further development was then paused to accommodate a key project lead from one entity who unexpectedly needed to manage a serious family emergency. So in recent weeks, negotiations have resumed, and the city is now working closely with the University of Vermont's Center for Rural Studies to finalize an agreement for the project's first phase, which will be a comprehensive review of existing literature and data. UVM CRS team brings considerable experience in generating reports, utilizing census data, conducting needs assessments, reviewing existing literature, and analyzing audits. So once this review work is completed, discussions between UVM, CRS, and the local bidder will continue focusing on designing the broader community engagement strategy, the collection of new data, and generating and assessing policy options. City staff have kept the Vermont Department of Commerce and Community Development informed about the delays and anticipate the need for a 1-year grant extension. The state has signaled that this will likely be approved, which will allow us to continue into 2026, which is a relief. And despite the delays, we are enthusiastic about the innovative collaborative model that is being developed. And we think that it has the potential to set a new standard for how community engagement projects are executed in Vermont. No update on plans review process. Airport noise mitigation program. So there will be a public meeting at the Chamberlain Elementary School on Wednesday, October 23rd, so this Wednesday, from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And then the Winooski public meeting will be at the high school this week on Thursday from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And these meetings will provide an overview of the draft noise exposure maps that they have been working on. So it's good progress. All right. And then moving on to just general housing-related operational updates. So there have been 13 total zoning permit applications since July 1st, 4 of which were for residential uses, and then since around that time as well, there have been about 20 inquiries about adding additional units, most of them of the gentle infill nature in residential districts, so adding an ADU or creating duplex, triplex, or quadplexes on a residential lot. City Council, as you all know, approved the scope of the Armory redevelopment project at the last October meeting. Staff are currently gathering the needed information to complete the request for proposals. The RFP should be posted in November, with bids received before the end of the year. Senator Sanders' office notified staff that our congressionally directed spending request for the project for $1 million has been advanced by the Senate Appropriations Committee out of committee. The final determination of the inclusion of the Armory funding will be subject to deliberations with the Republican-led House. So hopefully we make it through. The Housing Commission is currently working on currently in the process of continuing improvement efforts on the Housing Trust Fund programming, which is a constant journey. We are right now working on the home improvement program to more seamlessly integrate it into the existing efforts by the city to improve housing quality through inspections by code enforcement. So the 2 programs are completely separate right now. But after speaking with Jesse Baker actually about their new rental registry, they have a revolving loan fund, and I realized that our HIP program theoretically is for code-related repairs. So I was like, why are they not connected to each other? So I've been working with the code team and the Housing Commission to think about ways that we could have it be more of a seamless referral process, part of which was realizing that a lot of the eligibility criteria was too restrictive. So we are looking at removing a lot of the barriers that are currently written into the program that have made all 5 of the applications I received since working here ineligible. So definitely excited to continue working on that and hopefully have it as kind of a carrot with the stick for the code program. And the BCA conducted reappraisal appeal hearings on September 11th and September 19th. An inspection committee consisting of 3 board members were assigned to the 14 properties. Of the 14 properties, 1 property withdrew. On October 9th, the BCA meeting reconvened to present the reports from each of the inspection committees, along with the final remarks from the applicant as well as the assessor. Following the presentation of the inspection reports, the BCA entered into deliberative session to discuss each of the 13 appeals. On October 11th, the city clerk drafted and prepared the decision reports, and the BCA members approved them prior to mailing. The first group of decision reports will have until November 11th to request the appeal to the Director of Property Valuation and Review or to the Chittenden Superior Court. The final 2 decision reports will be mailed on October 17th, so the deadline for appealing the decision will be on November 17th. The landlord survey for the 24-25 fiscal year was distributed at the start of the fiscal year, so July 1st, and we've received about 185 responses. I will now have to do further outreach because a lot of the big buildings don't respond, so I call them and then ask for the data and enter it in manually. So after I do that, I will be able to analyze all of the responses and then gather insights on rent prices, bedroom sizes, number of applications each unit receives, and have a list of property owners who are interested in increasing the density on their property and who have allowed us to reach out by email. So we will theoretically have a list of people who are interested in ADU or infill projects, which will be great as we kind of look to expand more into that realm. Moving to short-term rentals, so the numbers have actually changed since this was written on Friday. So now we're at 53 applications that have been received, with 29 that have been approved, and 41 out of the 53 applications received have been for non-owner occupied properties, which is again kind of continuing the pattern of loosely 75-25. We have received about $34,000 in license fees so far, but with all of the applications we've received, we should be receiving about $60K. About 50% of the applications that we have received have either been delinquent on taxes in violation due to not following up on code inspections or just not on the public building registry at all. There have been about 20 that were just not on the public building registry at all. So there are 22 applications still pending, and we've been working with most of those property owners for a couple of months now. So it's a process, but we're catching a lot of people that either were not aware they needed to be on the public building registry or just weren't. So it's been good from a housing quality perspective. Owners will have until November 6th to comply with the ordinance, and plans are being made to initiate enforcement of properties marketing on Airbnb or VRBO, but who do not have a license number posted. I have done some preliminary enforcement research, matching listings to active licenses, and I know that there are at least 10 properties who have not applied yet, that we know their address, and then I think it will probably be closer to 20. So after November 6th, Code and I are meeting, and we're going to work on how to educate people first and foremost, and then move to code enforcing if they need to. So the chart below shows kind of just the numbers that I have verbally said in an easier to digest manner. We did do a projection for what it will look like if we make it to 70 licenses, which I definitely think we will, which again, I think the peak that we had ever recorded was 93. So we have a lot of applications comparatively. I think Burlington was at like 30% compliance after a full year, and we're still only a few months after July 1st. So people have been very good about complying, which has been great. I think theoretically with enforcement efforts and outreach, 80 is not off the table, which would be great. So, yeah, that's everything. I think I didn't miss a page. Yeah.
All right, thank you for the overview.
Yeah.
Questions from counselors?
No questions, but thank you ongoingly, forever and ever, for all of the work that you do. I know that it's a lot of legwork and a lot of computer work, and I just really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're very
Your research
gracious,
is very
Charlie.
thorough. What's that?
You're very gracious.
The job's hard.
I do have some questions. And I'll try and work in order of your memo.
Yeah.
So I did see, catch some of the proposed housing trust fund changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious, I did not spend a lot of time. It was kind of a
That's
very
fair.
quick, high-level review. So it appeared as though there were changes proposed to remove single-family access to the trust fund?
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, single family is still allowed, but we're more categorizing it into public buildings and private buildings,
Okay. So
which
that
maybe
was
is
the
why,
change that I caught.
yeah, because
Okay.
technically there are public buildings that are single family homes, and
Yep.
so it was getting a little confusing. But for HIP specifically, it was required to be owner occupied. Right now, it is the owner has to be moderate or low income. The tenants have to be moderate or low income. They have to do the lead program. There's just a ton of layers, which I understand why it was designed that way, because that is like the ideal applicant. But no one was meeting those qualifications. So we are trying to loosen them without completely unleashing. But no, single family home is still going to be allowed.
Okay.
Yeah, and I talked through the process a little bit more with John, since that will be a different process for private buildings because they're not getting in there to inspect them. So that would be like an external additional inspection that they would need to go and verify if the project was eligible for the program. And in an ideal world, we would have many applications. I can't imagine us having more than a couple a year. And John said that they were totally fine with doing that. So,
Okay.
yeah, but I see why that would be confusing.
Yeah, and again, it was a brief glance at the recent commission agenda
Yes.
and noticing some of the language changes. So thanks for the clarification. That's very helpful for context. So for the housing needs assessment, what's the depth of detail you expect in the report?
I expect it to be fairly detailed, just considering the entity that is producing the report. One of the staff members is also heavily involved with the Vermont census as well, which is great. About 40 hours of work will be going into the preliminary report. But I'm happy to share, we just received the project agreement, but it's going to include kind of an analysis of data, a comparison for Winooski to other municipalities, county, state, and then they are doing a lot of literature review for the policy interventions as well, which will be great to get kind of both of those components before we undertake the larger study. Which will also be nice because we don't want to duplicate work that's already been done. There's lots of needs assessment, there's lots of equity work that has been done, and we definitely don't want to be asking the same populations, the same questions over and over, because I know that's also very frustrating for people. I expect it to certainly be more detailed than any other housing report we currently have access to. Especially since, VHFA just did their whole housing needs assessment. There's a kind of a plethora of reports available And we will be meeting with them and providing all of those to make sure that those will all be included. You know, our equity audit and our strategic plan, things like that. So I'm confident that it'll be fairly detailed, but.
Okay. And it will be Winooski specific and not based on proxy data?
Yes, it'll be Winooski specific, yeah.
Great. I've experienced reports where it wasn't quite the depth of detail as expected, which is why I asked. So.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's hard because the report can only be as good as the data that exists, which is part of the process of like realizing, you know, we don't have data on this, or the data that we have on this is from the community survey from the Census Bureau, and that is just not, you know, a high rate of response, so it's not the best data. So I think that will be helpful as well, of like informing the larger project of, you know, we don't really have solid data on this specific housing metric. Maybe we should dig deeper into that and collect our own primary data. But yeah.
Will there be any like field surveying to kind of get a pulse on existing data to current conditions?
What do you mean?
So there's like the tabletop work of reading and researching data reports, what have you, and compiling a summary report based on those findings.
Yeah.
Will there be any in-field assessments?
For this preliminary report, no. But we are going to have like a work group that is going to be, like I think Ruth will be on it, and staff members, I'll probably ask Ray. Sorry, Ray. Housing Commission Chair, someone from the school. So we are trying to have a representative group so that we can make sure that all of the existing data and reports are included in this preliminary report. But I think all primary data collection will be for the larger project, which will be to be determined with the other bidder.
Is it something the Housing Roundtable will be part of the discussion?
Open to whenever you get to the point of knowing where to invite.
Cool, thanks. Let me just skip down here. There was another question. But if somebody else, or if you have any questions, I can pause while I'm looking for. Thanks.
No, I don't have any.
Okay. I'll follow up with you afterwards if it comes to mind. It might have related to the short-term rentals, but I think those were the two primary questions we had, so thank you.
Great, yeah.
Well, I'll open it up to public comment as well. If somebody attending online has any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat or raise hand feature. Okay, seeing no public comment, hearing no further questions from council. Thank you for the update, Jasmine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will move on to item C, on for discussion approval of the fiscal year 2026 budget goal setting. Welcome, Angela.
I'm actually going to kick us off here and
Elaine.
talk a bunch, so apologies in advance. So staff asked for your direction as we work to build the proposed budget over the next 3 months by choosing one of these options, a level services budget or a catch-up budget. Level services, this allows for costs for existing services to be updated for estimated inflation and cost of living increases, but does not increase investment in any area to continue catching up on deficiencies. Catch-up budget allows for costs for existing services to be updated and for some increases to continue catching up on some deficiencies. If council chooses this option, council members are asked to identify priorities or priority master plan vision areas to fund. Note that council may make changes to the budget proposed by the city manager during your budget deliberations at council meetings. Staff provided some contextual information in your packet, similar to information received during your retreat in June. Christine, could I bother you to put the link in the chat?
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to highlight 5 of these in particular: the residential tax rate history, the comparison of our taxes with similar Vermont communities, the FY26 budget assumptions, the list of unfunded needs, and budget outreach so far. So for the residential tax rate history, which is at the bottom of page 1, the first table, the fourth row down shows that the municipal tax rate, normalized by the common level of appraisal, has decreased each year since fiscal year 2020. This is yet another way of showing the message that staff have been conveying to council the last 3 years, that Winooski city taxes have gone down each year relative to taxpayers' other expenses. As staff have been saying, this is not sustainable. Also, I'd like to call your attention to the comparison of taxes with similar Vermont communities. This is on the second page, the orange and blue charts. These are the fiscal year 2025 updates of the same charts that council saw in June. Note that in June we showed tax dollars raised per person, which is the rightmost chart, or was the rightmost chart. Now that's been revised to be, lost my place here.
Tax dollars per household.
Right. Let's see. Yes. So with tax dollars raised per person, we were in the middle of the sample, this sample of municipalities. This household tax dollars raised per household also shows us in the middle of the pack. That is thought to be a somewhat better portrayal of burden, but it actually had the same ranking. The third item I'd like to highlight are the initial fiscal year 2026 assumptions. Looking at the table at the top of page 6, sorry about that weird gap in the document there. Just health insurance and union contract cost of living increases alone, or union contract cost of living driven increases alone, even offset by an assumed 0.8% increase to the grand list, that would raise the estimated tax rate by 2.89%. And this does not include step increases. Any other estimated cost changes due to inflation or demand, including to the capital improvement plan, nor increases in contributions to regional services, especially public transit, namely Green Mountain Transit. The fourth contextual item I'd like to highlight is a separate memo that is the updated list of unfunded needs. The good news is that the community has crossed some items off from last year's list, such as the Winooski Bridge replacement, Hoods Crossing signalization, and the phone system. However, a few new items have been added, including wastewater treatment plant, flood resiliency improvements, and downtown 3-acre stormwater improvements. And the list remains long regardless. The point being that staff continue to agree with council's determination from this year's retreat to not change plans for debt or plans to continue catching up on capital needs. The last contextual item to highlight is the budget outreach that Angela has spearheaded for this budget season to date. That exercise that you've seen in the news lately, so for the $100 in play money budgeting exercise is kind of the mouthful I've come up with. Between 2 farmers markets, we've had 61 Winooski residents participate, and 30 people so far have responded to the online budget survey, which asks different questions from the $100 budgeting exercise. Note that we can't know whether the sample is representative of the views across the community, although there is some geographic distribution. Angela's been recording where folks live in the city. That said, this is more engagement than we've ever had, to our knowledge, on budget at this stage in particular, as opposed to after your property tax bill comes, and in a way that accounts much better for the bigger context, individual comments of, compared to individual comments of support or detraction of this or that expense. So I really want to recognize Angela for this great idea, the design of it and execution of it, and also appreciate the mayor helping Angela carry it out at its first appearance at the farmers market a couple weekends ago. We haven't analyzed the survey results yet, the online survey, but for the $100 budgeting exercise, I'll let Angela describe the results so far.
So it's been pretty consistent across the multiple rounds. We do this in roughly $1,000 increments so that we're able to keep it rotating. In every instance except one, community services has been leading the pack in terms of where people want to see money invested. In one round, capital did come at the top. Percentage-wise, those 2 items are hovering around the low 20% of investment. Public Works sits at around 18%, with all others hovering around 12%. So pretty consistent in terms of investment.
Thank you. So before I turn it back to council to have your discussion about directing staff to develop a level services or a catch-up budget, is there anything else you want to add, Angela?
There's just a lot of moving parts at all times. So even though there are some numbers in here, those are still in flux and could change next week for some of those things.
Thank you for compiling all of this and for the extra efforts on community engagement this year, which we will continue to partner on. I would ask first if folks have clarifying questions about any of the information that's been presented in the packet.
It probably is in here, but just to ask the question, are we making any estimates on the reduction of local options tax due to the Main Street construction?
We've not yet done any estimates on revenues for fiscal year 26. We do have some buffer within our local options tax right now with what we have budgeted for revenue and what we are actually seeing come in revenues. We are due to receive our next quarterly payment relatively soon. Our last quarterly payment did not appear to be impacted by the construction.
Okay.
Remind us when that period was.
So we received the payment in August, so it would have been for the tax period filed in June.
Okay.
So April, May, and June. Right at the beginning.
So those are quarterly.
We do receive payments quarterly. The businesses do have the option to file an annual sales tax report, but many choose to do it quarterly. We don't see very many filing an annual report.
Okay.
So we would expect the next one in...
So we received the payment in August, so we'll get our next payment in November.
Okay.
So you'd have some more information, ahead of budgeting.
Great. Thank you.
I had a couple quick questions about where you listed the prior fiscal year investments. The FY24, the money set aside for regional dispatch and admin support, we paused that last year. Am I recalling that correctly?
That is not correct. That is currently still sitting in the professional services budget for the police department.
So are we banking that then, or spending it over the years since we've instated it?
It's within the department budget, so we can spend it within that department.
Okay.
What I'm trying, that's a good question, Christine, because was it one time or has that now just been in the budget? I think this was a discussion that came up last time as well.
It was definitely discussed during the FY25 budget season, but that was going to be the ongoing costs if we transition to regional dispatch for administrative support in the department. So the funding was maintained so that if we were able to transition to regional dispatch during the fiscal year, we would have that admin money available. We have not necessarily earmarked that money, but fiscal year 24 is currently under audit, and we can mark that as assigned for regional dispatch related costs. So that could be something that helps offset those construction expenses that we've talked about within our own police department, as well as recruiting for a position for admin as well.
Okay. And then in Public Works, there's the note about like $800,000 for Main Street. This was all offset by TIF funds. Am I right about that?
For the most part, it did go up a little bit. In addition to that, I think we went up by an additional 140 during the budgeting process to increase the overall capital budget. It may not have been specifically for Main Street, but a huge portion of that $817,000 increase was from TIF funding.
Okay.
There are some BCA decisions still pending. We probably won't know those until mid-November at the earliest. And there have been, I'm sure you've already incorporated, but just asking the question about recent demolitions within the city. I'm thinking of at least 4 properties that have been demolished, and presuming that those have come off the grand list. Is that already kind of baked into this table on page 2 of the goal discussion memo?
So the demolitions, did they occur after April 1st?
Yes, I believe so.
So they would not impact the current year grand list, and anything that's constructed in the replacement, as long as it's constructed before April 1st of next year, would be incorporated into that. And if the property was one that was significantly damaged due to fire, its value was already significantly reduced in the grand list that was lodged on April 1st.
There are at least 3 of 4 properties that were not demolished from fire, that were not fire related. Barlow, Franklin, LeClaire.
I anticipate that those are going to have some sort of development before April 1st
Okay.
to replace what was torn down.
Okay.
And probably in excess of what was previously existing, given I believe that many of those were single-family homes previously.
Okay, great. So and then just following up that thought, so basically the table, on page 2, the grand list value comparison, it's not providing any kind of forward-thinking estimate. It's looking at FY25 and not even in some type of estimate for FY26.
The only estimate in there is that assumption of 0.8% grand list growth, which
Okay.
is kind of a conservative middle
Okay.
average,
Great, that's
which
helpful.
takes into account things coming and going, really. Yeah.
The assessor, the building and zoning departments, they will meet and do an estimate based on permits that have been pulled before we finalize our estimate for grand list growth that is officially recorded into the budget.
Okay.
So it's generally an underestimate because it's only permits that have been taken out until the winter. So any spring permits are usually not incorporated.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
All right, well, I would invite folks to share thinking, reflections as we work towards some sort of direction. Does anyone want to volunteer to kick off?
Sure. So I appreciate the way that this was all presented. Thank you very much. Especially the highlight of kind of the healthcare costs, because that's something that we know is going to impact what we do, particularly at this table. I think I've spoken with several of you already, but I think that if we are going to do any sort of catch-up budget and not just doing a level set budget, that we should really continue to be looking at what we looked at last budget season, which is all of those capital and physical costs, water fund, road, all of those types of things for a very long time. We've invested in other services that we provide, and we all recognized through our last budget session and other conversations and presentations that Winooski has not invested in those capital expenditures and those infrastructure expenditures. We know that we've got 2 bridges that likely need to be replaced, and we don't know what type of grant funding we may get for those in the city, along with all of the many, many, many other roads and sidewalks we all hear about very frequently. So that's the type of catch-up I would like to see if we are looking at a catch-up budget. I know that folks are, I shouldn't say all folks, there's a decent amount of people who are hoping that we would do something level funded. I understand the pinch that people have felt since the reassessment when it has come to taxes and how much people's taxes have gone up. That said, I won't advocate for level setting just because I do know we have those really big projects that we should be investing in and trying to put some money aside for. So those are my main thoughts.
Thank you for kicking us off.
You're welcome.
I'll take the opportunity to provide the counterpoint then, so we can keep it an interesting discussion. I've heard from more residents than ever before this year how difficult just affordability in Vermont is, and how much this year's or last year's decisions have impacted them tax-wise, from us, from the school, from the state, many other sources. As presented tonight, we're looking at like 3% to retain existing services without step increases. We know GMT is going to ask for more funding. The RPC previewed a potential new equity position cost. We're still stepping up funding to other partners. We've got revenue loss coming in our next agenda item. We don't know what's going on with the SRO, with the BCA appeals. In my estimation, development has been slowing down, is what I've observed. So I don't have confidence in high grand list growth. I think we have many unknowns. I also see in this memo, while we have been having tax increases lower than COLA, we have been working up. In the last 5 years, we've had something like 1.5 million in investments. And to me, it feels like it's time to take a pause and let our residents catch up. On top of that, we have many new initiatives ongoing right now. Main Street Bridge, the Hoods Crossing Signal, Lot 7D, extra road and sidewalk work this year, the potential Armory project. We may need to respond to just cause eviction. We may need to respond to language access and housing needs assessment. And while those things may result in more catch-up, I think taking a level service approach now buys us some time and lets us work towards that in the future. I think those outstanding items could illustrate where catch-up is needed in a way that we can't see right now. And so for me, that's another reason to pause on additional catch-up until we have more information there. Who else wants to share their thoughts?
Yeah, I think.
To keep things interesting, when reviewing the mayor's memo that was included in this, it did not actually match kind of my memory of our strategies and priorities discussion, which was really coming to, the fact that there's so many issues with affordability that are outside the city, that are outside the city's control, and that residents and the city need to really be advocating with those, the state level, all of that, federal level, thinking about the issues with inflation, thinking about the issues with rent. So much of that is outside of the city's control. What's inside the city's control is maintaining the level of services, if not improving the level of services that we provide. Our tax rate, unfortunately, is high. It's not the highest, as Elaine pointed out, but we do have lower income folks as the majority of our population. That said, reducing the services, or the services that I'm just going to guess folks would propose reducing first, are the ones that are most needed by our most vulnerable residents. So to me, I would be in favor of a catch-up budget, actually thinking of some of those things that the mayor mentioned, of language access, of thinking about, we know there are the continued issues with the library, we know there are the continued issues with fire. I feel like what we're seeing is that we can do our best by residents by providing them with service and safety and security, and decreasing our services would do the opposite of that. So I'm in favor of very much at least level services. I definitely lean more towards a catch-up budget because of that. And I do wonder, I think sometimes we hear from folks that aren't residents. They're landlords and they are developers and they don't live in our city and do not vote for us and do not vote for our budgets. And I just want to like highlight that they have a level of access to us that some of our residents don't, and that they use that access, use that privilege that they have to make their voice louder than necessarily, again, our residents, the people that we serve, the people who vote for us, the people who we are trying to represent. So that's just something that I've been having in mind and kind of seeing who has been coming forward with these issues. Are they residents? Again, even just thinking about the small amount of data that Angela was able to present, community service was number one. And that is what is serving many of our residents. That's our public face. That's serving our most vulnerable residents. So all that is kind of what I'm keeping in mind. So who has the loudest voice? Are they even voting for us and our budgets? Or are they looking for excuses because they feel bad because they raised rent and should maybe look at their own finances instead of questioning ours when we're trying to help people and they're trying to make money?
Thanks, Aurora. I just want to be clear that no one here, myself included, said anything about reducing services. I was supporting a level service budget. Charlie, I think you were ready to share.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay in the same vein. I'm looking at these unfunded must-dos, and some of them seem like the consequences of not funding them are catastrophic, in my opinion. I'm just thinking about the ongoing, like, commitment that we say that we have to our code and fire folks that we're just not meeting, and then we're blaming it on the budget, but we and the public set the budget. With that said, I think we should catch up. I think that kicking the can down the road is how we got here. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Brent has to say, because I'm sure there's a bit. And with more knowledge of more budgets than I've seen. But when I'm specifically looking at all of these points about like our fire and safety folks and like the continuity of like keeping this building functioning at a safe level, I think that passing that buck is a dangerous thing to do. Yeah, that's my 2 cents at face value.
I think I don't know, maybe threading the needle between all of you. I don't know how I could be managing to do that, but looking at the unfunded needs, I'm surprised, we'll go with surprised, with items that ended up in the must-do category versus the really should-do. So automatic sprinkler systems is under should-dos, and that's lower than a second bathroom in the fire department. To me, one has extensive financial risk to the city and to our taxpayers. The other is something that I think we should strive towards in the near future, but it feels as though it's not a financial risk for not having that. So there are items probably under the should-dos that I would advocate for moving up to being higher in priority and making sure that we actually invest in those items, and push off some of these items that are listed currently under the must-dos for a future date, personally. So I think I'm perhaps, with that example, more in line with the mayor and deputy mayor, but maybe threading the needle probably between both of you on being very fiscally conservative, giving all of the unknowns. I think that was my most frustrating point last year was bringing forward a budget to our voters when we had no idea how the reappraisal was going to go. And even when we were trying to find an acceptable medium, in the end, it still ended up being like 11%, much higher than we anticipated. So with all those unknowns, I really caution us. We don't know how fast development's going to happen. We don't know how the BCA analysis is going to come in. I feel like I've seen more signs go up for property demos, and we don't know the turnaround time for any of that. So I'm in favor of covering our expenses, our current expenses, and making some strategic investments for capital projects. And I think the Finance Commission and Infrastructure Commission last year at the joint meeting, and again this past week, again said that they will always write a check for infrastructure. You cannot go wrong with investing in infrastructure.
Agreed.
So I don't know if that actually answers the question, but I think that's where I'd fall.
Can I make a comment, Christine?
Certainly.
So John can chime in if he wants to, of course, John Audie, but just to respond to the second bathroom piece, there's a certain amount of risk that we're managing, carrying with a city-owned building. There's a different type of risk we're managing by not being able to respond to fire emergencies in the city, which is really what that second bathroom is indirectly about. So just to clarify why those are categorized the way they are in that memo. In terms of this, we haven't gone through the leadership team budget congresses yet, so I can't say this for a certainty, but what I'm hearing so far is that we're not actually likely to propose anything coming off of that unfunded list into this budget. It's the point of that list annually has been, please don't change plans for debt, because there's a lot of stuff that we need to do. And also before you want to add something new that's not on any list anywhere, please consider this context. So just explaining that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, a level service budget would include our existing capital plan with the 5% escalator.
Yes, I'm hoping that catch-up means including more than the 5%.
That's how I would interpret catch-up. And I'm advocating against that. I just want to ask everyone on council, like, literally this year, or over the past several months, I've heard many times from actual residents, both renters and homeowners, how much they are struggling financially and how much the tax rate increases were difficult for them this year.
Yeah.
And how they don't want to see continued big increases. And I think a level service budget based on what's presented here is probably already 5% easily. And we did 11% last year. Like, are we giving staff direction that we would accept another double digit or similarly high, another 8%?
No, I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, I've heard it, again, from renters and from owners, and through an activity I did in the summer all across the state. It's a huge concern. It's actually surpassed most voters' concerns as being the number one concern heading into this election season. So it's not for nothing what you're saying. I just worry about Winooski's history of not investing in itself, because we're worried about what the school may do, or overburdening residents, which of course we don't want to do. And I don't think, what I'm not advocating for is for like a huge catch-up budget, like anything double digit. I was against the double digit budget last session. I'm against it this time around as well. But Bryn, as you were saying, some of the unfunded really should do's, I feel like should be must do's, like the annual capital funding for sidewalk replacement. I feel like that is something that we hear about over and over again. And, one very interesting thing about the budget outreach that Angela did, which I don't know how many times I commended you on, but I'll commend you on it again. But that said, there were recognized some, problems in that budget outreach. It's great, 20 people participated, but, some people would put all their money in the police budget, for example, and Angela would have to kindly remind them, well, they need roads if the police officers are going to travel in their cars. Same thing with community services. Well, you need city staff in order to manage those projects. So if you put all of your money into that, so
Yeah.
I don't want to I don't think we can look at this assuming that this is
We did
completely
see a
well
very different
analyzed.
type
Yeah.
of spending in our outreach this past Sunday.
Okay, yeah.
Where people were allocating among all of the different buckets.
That's good.
So learning, we did change
Yeah.
the pitch a little bit.
And I think it's a great
Yeah.
effort. I just don't want us to look at this budget outreach and be like, well, this is 100% what we've got to do, because there's a lot of factors that are playing into
And
how
one
folks are throwing their money there. I also don't want to, nor did I, advocate for cutting anything that we have at the moment. And, you know, to your point, Mayor, there are things that we're going to have to consider. GMT is likely going to come to us with a very large ask. We can hope that the legislature will fund that, but we know how difficult that has been. So I want to leave room in our discussion for things like that, which will cost us money, but maybe something that we'd want to look into. So I really don't want to be saying, yeah, let's do a catch-up on every single place we'd like to do catch-up on. I think we'd really want to hone in on what we want to be doing that catch-up on and how much. And I think the last time we did this, I mean, I think at one point, Elaine, you asked us, like, what do you want it to be? And we'll make it work around there. And I appreciated that. And I feel like that may be where we need to go this time if we do decide to do some form of catch-up budget. Because I know that double digits is something that people can't afford. And, you know, my own property tax bill went up a lot. It's a lot of money, and we have I don't mind sharing, but we've got one of the veterans discounts in the city, and it's still tough for us. So my husband and I both have jobs, and if it's tough for us, I can only imagine what it is for other people. So I don't want to be advocating for spending too much money, but I do want to make sure that we're not ignoring stuff.
And one thing that we do have is that when people are looking at their tax bill, they're looking at the total that they're being billed. For the municipal side, on the average property, so the new assessment of $414,700 or $414,100, the total increase from last year on an average home to the total in FY25 was $333 on the city side. So yes, it's an impact, absolutely, but $333 a year.
Councilor Hurd?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm struggling with, Elaine mentions and Angela mentions for good reason, like not trying to budget around what the school taxes are. And I am hearing, and I really agree, and I think one of the other issues then again is, are we thinking about budgeting around, like, the state needs to redo how it's doing school taxes. And that's gonna be a huge discussion in the coming year. Like, how tax rates are calculated is unfair and unequitable, and we can only hope that they'll look at that and think about maybe a more aggressive tax, such as an income tax, that would actually support equity in our city. And thinking as well, like, one of the huge issues that we're seeing that organizations, cities, and towns throughout Vermont are facing is this ridiculous hike from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Like, why aren't we doing stuff about that? Like, there are mechanisms where there are mechanisms that could be used to have them not, just be trying to make more and more money off of us. So again, like, I'm coming around, like, I hear the affordability issue and recognize that with rents, that's not on us. The way that rents have been rising, as I think we have to talk about every single year, is not on us as much as some landlords and developers might like to say it is. It's on them. They're making the business decision. They're making the ethical decision, however those ethics work out, to raise rent. So they, again, sometimes they say that it's, and we've tried to let renters know about how much that increase might look out if they're equitably distributing it. But a lot of times they're not. So again, like, there are all these issues, and I'm just wondering if there are other levers we could pull instead of, again, feeling like, I don't know, we're taking services away from our residents because of the financial decisions happening elsewhere. That, yeah, I feel like there are other levers we can push to get to better affordability and help our residents advocate for as well.
So just some reflective thoughts on that is, while it's not within our control, the timeline and assurance about those factors changing is also unknown. And there's the reality where if we do have a higher tax rate, it's likely landlords are just going to pass that through, and rents will continue to increase in reflection of that increased tax rate. So there's, like, to your point, there are a lot of uncontrollables, and there's pressure that we can put on our state and federal legislators, but the timeline for that is also unlikely to be effective within this 3 months that we have to decide an FY26 budget that goes to voters who trust us to put something forward that is reasonable and sustainable. So I think, our legislative policies that the mayor works hard on with the city manager and our partners from our surrounding towns, I think that addresses part of it, but it still goes to a larger body where it's unknown when a decision will be made, how that decision will fall out. So I think it is the greater context of, yeah, there's a lot that's not within our control, but we can't make a decision blindly without, if you pull a string somewhere, it's gonna get shorter somewhere else. So that's kind of my thought process of that, how being fiscally judicious really is our primary role here. And I think from the sound of it, at least correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't sound like councilors are proposing removing any of the current services. It's just a matter of, if we are doing more than covering our current costs, what would that be and how high would that be? Am I interpreting that right?
I agree.
Okay.
Would it be fair to say that the majority of the body supports a conservative catch-up focused on infrastructure and fire safety?
I believe so.
I think that would be fair. I personally would like to know, is there any cost savings in not having to rely on St. Mike's for fire support? And, where is it that we can invest that will actually pay off in 5 or 10 or X years? That's really what I'm curious about, particularly with the unfunded must-dos. Is there any way that we actually catch up on any of the items, or is it that 5 years from now, an unforeseen failure causes us to have to spend the same amount of money again fixing the same problem? And not with these specific items, but generally speaking, I think you guys are picking up what I'm laying down. Is there anything that we can actually invest in that will save us money as a city?
Yeah. So 2 parts to that. One is return on investment, and the other part is avoided cost.
Yes.
So
Thank you
essentially,
for the vocabulary lesson.
Yeah. So it's essentially,
I'm looking for specifics.
Yeah. It's essentially like, what can we invest in now where we'll see that payoff within hopefully 3 to 5 years, and where is the other investment of, if we do it now, then we're saving ourselves money.
Like the
Like
brine
if
maker.
we get fully recruited
Right.
for code and fire, that obviously saves recruitment money and retention money. And having a bathroom, having sleeping quarters for third shift, all of that stuff, does that add up to cost savings over time? I'm much more encouraged by that, but I also think that whether that makes us money or not, it makes sense to do it. I'm just curious as to, is there anything that we can point to that will pay us back in some form in 5 years' time?
Yeah, if you want to make that part of your direction, then that would help us prioritize what we bring to you.
And that's my curiosity as a counselor. I'm not trying to strong arm the rest of council, but I think that makes logical fiscal sense is where can our dollars not be spent again? Because these are always going to be ongoing issues and ongoing things, ongoing services that we want to provide our constituents. Can we save ourselves in the future, I guess? And I'm asking because I don't know.
I will say that for fire safety, the avoided costs might not be by the city. It might be if something happened and we were sued, but if they don't sue us, do we then not care? You know what I mean? Like, is it?
That's a fair question.
Yeah, some of those, just a broader view of costs might be something that we end up presenting.
Okay, thank you.
I particularly would be interested in avoiding costs to the city and to the taxpayers. For me.
Aurora?
I just wanted to ask more specifically about community services. Again, thinking about the changes with the O'Brien Center and the fact that our library has been closed due to it, for lack of a better term, being poisonous. Where are we thinking about stuff like that? So I hear the capital cost, and I hear fire and code as two of where I see three most underfunded. And I'm just wondering about community services needs.
So just a point about the library, I feel like I felt recently that maybe we haven't been stating that correctly. The library actually isn't closed. The library facility is closed. We still have library services, just to be clear.
I rented a book.
In terms of the costs of that space and the current condition that it's in, those costs are being rolled into the project costs, which should be zero to the taxpayer. In terms of other community services, I'm not currently anticipating presenting anything new.
Okay, thank you.
But again, we haven't been through budget congress, so we'll see. Also, with the context of today's direction, of course.
Are there any questions, comments from members of the public? Additional discussion or thoughts, or should I propose a motion?
Proposal.
I have plenty of thoughts. But
What's the motion?
That's fair. Okay.
It's going to be a wordy motion.
It is, yes. Oh, and I should probably share it with Jenny. Would someone like to make a motion to approve direction to staff for fiscal year 2026 budget goal setting to present a conservative catch-up budget focused on infrastructure and fire safety, and differentiate or denote items to show how they may save us money in the long run or provide return on investment?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
So when you say us, you mean the city and taxpayers?
Yes. Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion carries, and I will email it to Jenny and CC you, Eileen.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for
Yes.
all of your information. Okay.
By the way, clean audit again.
Hey.
Congratulations. 10 years running or something.
Now I just need to do the financial statements.
Item D, on for discussion approval, the memorandum of understanding with Vermont Student Assistance Corporation for payment in lieu of taxes and transitional payments.
Yes.
Elaine.
reading mostly from my cover sheet, and most of the heavy lifting, though, was done by Angela. Tax-exempt entities are exempt from paying property taxes. However, many such entities that are property owners recognize that they benefit greatly from the services provided by their hosting municipality, in this case, us. As such, many provide payments in lieu of taxes, pilot, to the municipality. The Vermont Student Assistance Corporation is one such tax-exempt entity providing a pilot to the city. According to an agreement between the city and the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, also known as VSAC, for fiscal year 2025, the pilot was to be calculated based on an assessed value set as the fair market value of the property, adjusted for the common level appraisal set by the state with a tax rate equal to the municipal tax rate. However, with the reappraisal, this resulted in a much lower payment than they had been providing. We discussed this possibility with VSAC's chief financial officer in July of 2023, who indicated his intention to keep the city whole and not decrease the amount paid for the pilot. Unfortunately, we did not execute an agreement to this effect. Unfortunate because in mid-2024, that chief financial officer retired. The new CFO did agree to a transition payment plan, which steps down the payments over 2 years, such that the pilot amount will be just based on the agreed upon assessed value starting in FY27. This decreases the current fiscal year revenue shortfall estimate to the general fund from $176,676 down to $25,000, which should be manageable. Does council have questions, or are you okay to execute this agreement?
How much was the pilot before the TIF ended?
It was over $200,000 a year.
Where did that come from? Like how?
They had a set in stone number that was part of their original purchase and sale agreement that escalated annually. There was actually a chart in their purchase and sales agreement that set their pilot amount through the end of the TIF. It was one of the things that was required to show the revenue stream to get the debt service obligated to do that project.
I'll mention for context that VSAC is no longer, and has not been for some time, occupying the entire building. They've been having to lease it out, and they're suffering from the same shortage of need for commercial space as everyone else. So that's partly why our appraisal came in so low, is because it's based on tenant rents, which they aren't able to get.
Income approach.
And that's why the current CFO was so worried and wanting to come in lower, because she's not able to forecast enough revenue.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I'm prepared to advance this. I really appreciate
It was reviewed by our attorney.
the negotiation and them being willing to step down. I'm just curious how it was structured to plummet at the end.
I don't think that was anticipated.
No, probably not.
At the time, yes.
Yeah.
When comparing it to some other commercial properties, the valuation did come in very low. We had asked some questions about the fact that it was a not-for-profit entity and why we would be using an income approach there, but we were assured that that was the best approach for this case.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions?
I already asked my question.
Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Seems very straightforward. This one.
any questions or comments from the public?
I also want to say thank you for the work that went into that. Clearly, it was,
A shocker.
yeah, I was surprised, but like really great effort to kind of turn it around. So,
Literally 2 weeks into the fiscal year, I found this hole and immediately reached out.
yeah. So just the fact that you saw that and you were able to be so successful in kind of turning a really bad situation around, I want to make sure I thank you and everyone else involved for that.
VSAC, certainly.
And please extend thanks
Yes.
as appropriate to VSAC.
We'll do.
Yep.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve for the memorandum of understanding with VSAC regarding pilot and transitional payments? And do I need to mention execution?
I would hope authorizing.
Yes,
hopefully the
and
city
authorize
manager.
the city manager to execute the agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is the end of the agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Indeed, thank you.